And now, Baljan, we are back with our wisdom series. And yes, if you've been following our wisdom series, we had a wonderful talk with the previous one. If at all you want to get information about how you can read up more or listen to the previous version, you can click on the link over here, bottom, and then it'll take you there. And right now, Baljan, we have again Dr. Shani Robins in our studio. Dr. Robins, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
And lastly, I think we left out, we talked about something very interesting. And you said that, when you have to practice these skills, you would require to be mindful. And then for that to kick in, you had talked about something called as, whether we are meditating on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you right now is, given the fact that many of us actually working in IT, stressful environments, and life gets busy, dropping the kids to school, picking them up, and going here, going there, getting groceries. The biggest thing people generally have is I don't have time, and they say, oh, if I had a half an hour time, I'd rather sleep, as opposed to meditate. So just in case for people who might not know what exactly meditation is, can you give us a little bit of intro as to what exactly meditation you're talking about, and how can somebody use it, and how frequently are supposed to do it?
Sure. And I should also mention before we get into that sometimes sleeping for half an hour rather than meditating is not a bad thing. When you're sleep deprived, getting some sleep helps.
For sure.
So that's also a whole other segment we can talk about, that we are a very sleep deprived society.
Oh.
So yeah, typically it's recommended people get 8.5 hours of sleep, and most people, especially in Silicon Valley, get maybe 6 or 7 hours. And so most people are walking around pretty sleep deprived most of the time. So, but in terms of the definition of mindful meditation, there are many models of meditation. Probably two common denominators of most models are the ability to bring our attention to the present. So that's one piece. And the other piece is being less reactive, observing rather than reacting.
Okay.
And so let's also remember that these practices and mindfulness in general as a concept has come from a tradition of enlightenment models of Buddhism and Hinduism and so on. And so the notion of ego transcendence, that's the idea where all of this is coming from. In Western culture, we've taken mindfulness as a concept and in part have applied it in ways that are a little bit simplistic at times, in terms of just not being reactive, in terms of not yelling at someone, or in terms of being less anxious. John Kabat-Zinn has done a lot of work in terms of reducing risks of heart attacks and things of that sort. And that makes sense. If we're reducing stress and anxiety, it reduces risks for heart disease. But the even deeper piece is that as we get less reactive, as we're observing things, it could be literally this bottle of water I'm holding in front of me. It could be everything from my own thoughts to body sensations. So let's take our thoughts, for example. Let's say I have a thought, what am I going to have for lunch later? If I can let that thought come and go, and then other thoughts that come my way, I wonder if I'm good enough to get that job, or I wonder if I'll lose that job, or I wonder if my wife or husband likes me, or so on. Whatever our thoughts are that go through our mind, if we can let those thoughts come and go, almost like hikers on a trail, they're just, we wave them through. We don't have to push them back. We don't have to rush them forward. Just take a deep breath, calm our body down, and wave those through. So suddenly we're less attached to those thoughts. We're less reactive to them. And that's the idea of practicing lower attachment.
So you're a man of science, and I know that you have also studied meditation part of it. So when you say there is a particular tradition of meditation which comes through, you said culturally it's handed down. When you say scientifically, when you talk about meditation, can you talk about what exactly, and are there certain things you can do? Are there any? The question I'm asking you, is there a procedure of doing it?
Do you have to sit in a certain posture? Do you have to be in a quiet environment?
Yeah.
I mean,
Unless you're sitting cross-legged in a very painful way, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
No. So, no, it doesn't. Pain doesn't have to be involved with this. It's difficult sometimes in terms of we find that our thoughts are jumping all over the place. So just to sit quietly is surprisingly difficult for many of us because we just do it so infrequently. But in terms of physical posture, things like that, basically just sitting upright is useful rather than lying down. For example, if you don't want to go to sleep, let's also note that it's useful our brain often has these two categories primarily, awake and anxious or asleep and relaxed. Those are two main categories that we've actively trained our brain states to be in. Part of what meditation also does for us is it trains our brains, it literally creates neural networks that shifts to a third category of not awake and anxious or asleep and relaxed, but rather awake and relaxed.
Awake and relaxed.
Awake and calm rather than one of the other two. And so the brain suddenly learns that that's possible and actually lays down neural networks to enable that to happen as we practice.
Wow, okay.
And so it's a state of being that needs practice because the architecture neurally just literally has to be laid down there. It's typically not there, both physically with potentially new neurons, physically potentially with neural connections that have to connect together to one another, and potentially by the amount of neurotransmitters within the brain of neurons that already exist. And so, and by the way, there's lots of good research on all of this, lots of books to read. Like one good book to read is a book called Altered Traits by Richard Davidson and Daniel Goleman, two people that actually have contributed a great deal to this field. Richard Davidson, of course, is University of Wisconsin, does phenomenal work in doing functional MRI imaging of the brains of Buddhist monks and others, long-term meditators. Daniel Goleman famously published a book on emotional intelligence.
Yes, yeah.
And so the two of them also, by the way, have been long-term meditators themselves for 30 to 40 years. And so in addition to being scientists and writers. And so a book like Altered Traits reviews nicely, and this is a relatively recent one, it was published this year, reviews the whole history of the science of mindfulness. And not only the history of it, but what effects it actually has on the brain, prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part, limbic system, which is the emotional centers, the interactions of the two. And what the typical results are that you actually see these neural changes, and not just from 10 or 20 years of meditation, you see them after 10 or 15 weeks of meditation.
Wow.
So very quickly, within weeks, you start getting results that are not only observable behaviorally or emotionally, you don't only start feeling differently, you can actually do functional MRI and see the neural differences in the brain after 8, 10, 12 weeks of, of meditation.
So I do have a question about how we go about doing it, but I had a question. I had a doubt actually. So you said that sleep and relaxed and awake and
Anxious.
Yeah.
So if you attain awake and anxious through meditation, so
Awake and calm.
awake and calm through meditation.
Awake and anxious, people have that one
Sorry,
down.
Yeah. Awake and calm. There you go. Awake and calm. I'm thinking awake and anxious right now. But awake and calm. So you're saying that. So theoretically, they don't require so much of sleep. Am I?
Sleep is another interacting variable with all of this. If someone is highly sleep deprived, they will likely fall asleep during meditation, which is okay.
That's okay, huh?
If they fall asleep, they fall asleep. It means the body needed that. So we don't have to berate ourselves. The whole point of meditation is to have just observing with low judgment. You just observe. And you let thoughts come and go rather than judging them or reacting to them or escalating on them. So if someone falls asleep, if someone's meditating and they fall asleep, and then they wake up and think, oh man, that sucks, I fell asleep, I did this wrong, and I can't believe I suck at this whole meditation thing, that betrays the whole point of meditating, where it's low judgment. You could wake up and say, that's interesting that I fell asleep, and just observe that like anything else.
Okay.
And that's actually part of the lineage of meditation.
So I've heard this thing called mindful meditation, which you and you talked about multiple conversations we've had. So is that something which is a certain way of doing it, or can you tell us a little about that?
So again, to typically be awake and alert, you typically want to sit up.
Okay.
So you sit up straight with your back straight. So that's also a good practice. Just putting your hands in your laps, or just in a relaxed way.
Relaxed state, okay.
So you're just allowing yourself to relax. Relax but alert. And then as you're doing your deep breathing, you reduce your breathing from your chest, you bring it down to your belly, so diaphragmatic breathing, and that activates the parasympathetic nervous system. And so that allows you to have a relaxation response physiologically. As you bring your breathing down to your belly, as you breathe in, you extend your belly out like a balloon. As you breathe out, as you exhale, you contract your belly in. So this is so-called diaphragmatic breathing. While you're doing that, you're focusing your attention on something very specific. So it could be, again, something right in front of us. It could be closing our eyes and visualizing the ocean. So let's say we do that. Let's say we close our eyes, visualize the waves of the ocean with the blue sky overhead and so on. We keep our attention on the waves. Suddenly a thought comes, what am I having for lunch today? Let the thought come, let it go, back to the waves. Yeah, but what about that date I'm going to go on this evening? That's interesting. I'll think about that later. Let it come, let it go, back to the waves.
Okay.
What about that job that the layoffs at work? That's even heavier. So it's going to be a little harder to let that come, let that go. Will I have a job next month? But again, that's just more advanced mindfulness. It's harder to do, but with practice, we can do that one too. And the more and more practice, the heavier and heavier thoughts we can let go. But that's also why the cognitive behavioral, the cognitive distortion stuff can help, because it can take some of the heaviness on. So, for example, if I think if I lose my job next month, I'm going to be lost and I'll never be able to get a job again. That's a pretty heavy thought to let come and go.
So there you go. So if you're meditating, all these thoughts can come through. So you're saying that the popular misconception of saying that to meditate you got to empty your mind is a myth. You got to let all the thoughts come in and let it go.
I think that's synonymous with emptying your mind.
Okay.
You just don't take your own thoughts or yourself too seriously is what it comes down to.
I know.
That's what these exercises are all about. That's the ego transcendence.
There you go.
Just don't take yourselves too seriously. We ourselves will come and go.
So you're basically saying you're not all that.
It's
humility. It's humility right there.
I was mostly pointing out that Kishan is not all that, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what. This is, of course, a very interesting segment. We're talking about meditation, which many of us actually might have the right idea about it. Some people might have the wrong conception about it. But anyway, so the thing is, if you want to actually see a video, we're going to make a video. We're going to ask Dr. Robins to actually demonstrate a guided meditation for us, if possible, on a video sometime.
Yeah.
And you'll be available for you guys to read, to listen to, and actually practice if you wanted in this particular channel itself. And I just want to thank you once again. In fact, every time we do a series, I get to learn a lot of things, and really thank you for that. And I learned about meditation right now.
Yeah, what's that?
I learned about meditation.
You learned a meditation?
Learned about meditation.
Yeah, okay,
but
good.
I have a quick question, very quick question. So this breathing you talked about, is there a duration which is prescribed, or and is the frequency important, or what do you think?
So it's not, there's no perfect way of breathing in and out. Some people say breathing out in your nose and out your mouth, or vice versa. There are a lot of different models. Some people say breathe for 2 or 3 seconds, some 4 or 5 seconds. The idea is you basically slow down the breathing. Okay. So what you're not doing is this. You're not hyperventilating. So it's not 1/2 a second breaths. It's on the order of 2 or 3 or 4 seconds. Breathe in, 2 or 3 seconds, breathe out. So you kind of slow it down. So that's the idea. And the key is also you're lowering it to your diaphragm. So you're not breathing out of your chest, which is fight, flight, and it gets all the cortisol and adrenaline flowing out of your belly, which is a relaxation response. So that tells our bodies and our brain that we're safe. And of course, I was joking about the short version that we're not all that is actually the perfect description. None of us are all that. And to really, really appreciate that would eliminate much of our problems.
Okay, so you're saying that even if you start off by doing a 3-minute or 5-minute breathing, just slowing it down to that level, it eventually can be extended further?
Absolutely. So 2 or 3 minutes is infinitely better than 0.
That's true.
It's like taking walks. People say, I don't have time to exercise. Well, what about a 10-minute walk around the block? What about next time a friend says, let's have lunch or dinner, how about let's take a walk instead? We can do those things, and those things are infinitely better. Some people say, well, walk around the block, what does that do? Someone once famously said that those of us who are seemingly just walking around the block are still running circles around those who are sitting on a couch. And so, not that it's a competition, we just talked about that too, but but the idea of we're competing against our past selves.
Wow.
We're competing against our less developmental selves.
And of course, Banjan, the whole purpose of this segment is so everybody out there actually start to lead a developmentally oriented lifestyle. In terms of trying to better ourselves always, and we are our own competitions, what we talked about also, and a lot of truth in all the age-old adages we have, right? And that's what we discuss on the Wisdom Series as well. I really want to thank Dr. Shani Robins for coming on this series, and I'm going to thank Pragnya for actually making this possible for us. And we'll talk more about these things in this series. And of course, if you have any questions you want to ask Dr. Robins, you can actually post it right here on the video, or you can email us, or you can Facebook as well, and we can ask him directly. In fact, soon what we're going to do is we're going to have these segments going live, so you actually can even directly call in on these segments to actually ask your questions also. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Robins. We hope to talk to you again with more information on these skills which you can use to lead a development-oriented lifestyle.
I appreciate it. Thank you for doing this.